Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the local review body for the 3rd of July 2023. Before we get into the agenda, there's something I would like to read. It's something I've been meaning to do for some time, but we never seem to get around to it. So before we start today's agenda, there's something I would like to clarify. We are asked by applicants to review their applications, which have been refused by delegated authority of the Council's planning officers. To do this, we review the whole application as originally submitted, plus more often than not, additional information supplied by the applicant or their agent. Sometimes that information must be placed before officers for review and reporting back. However, in the end, it is we that have to make the final decision. Always a majority decision. This may result in our reversing the decision and approving the application, or concurring with the officer's decision, or occasionally changing the reasons for refusal, which may possibly open the door for a revised application. There are two important points to note and take away here. We are not here to undermine the work of the planning officers. On the contrary, they know more about planning than we ever will. An applicant should not see this review body as a way to circumvent planning policies and/or requirements. Any changes we make are based upon material considerations which the majority of members believe should be considered to allow for any such change. And this leads to a second point, and it's a question of precedent, which I know is an item which we sometimes talk about, but I would like us to think that on the LRB at least, we do not set precedents in any of our decisions. Every decision, whichever way, depends on various factors which are unique to that application: its location, circumstance, the purpose of the application, and so on. And for example, any decision on today's papers should not be seen as setting any precedent, even for something similar. They are specific to those applications and those applications alone. And so with that, members, if we can then move on, may I ask, do we have any declarations of interest this afternoon, sorry. Councillor James. And Councillor Stewart.
No.
And as my colleague Mr. Elliott has reminded me, I haven't actually introduced everybody yet, so I would do that. Next thing. Therefore, to my right, I have Councillor Stewart, and to his right, Mr. Ross Burton. Mr. Burton is an independent consultant who has had no association with any of these cases until they were presented for appeal to the local review body. To my left is Councillor James, and to his left, Mr. Elliott, who is our legal advisor this morning, and to his far left, and welcome back, a special appearance by Mr. Danny Williams from Committee Services. I am Councillor Bob Braun and the convener of the LRB. Minutes for the next meeting is the next item on the agenda. As I was the only member of the last meeting, I can approve those minutes and happy to do so. So with that, members, can we move on to the items for this afternoon's consideration? Mr. Burton, if you'd like to introduce the first case, this is concerning the erection of a dwelling house, land 25 metres north of 94 South Street, Milnathort. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take you through the slides first. As you say, it's for the erection of a dwelling house on land to the rear of 94 South Street, Milnathort. So the first slide, please. So you can see the application site outlined in red on the screen there. You can see the garage, which serves the applicant's house at the moment. That garage would be demolished if the application were granted. So the house would be built within the red line area in the back, so this the sort of latter half of the rear garden. Next slide, please. And that where you can see a car parked across the driveway. That's the driveway for the application site. So you can see that there is land to the left of the driveway between the gable of the house and the driveway. Next slide, please. So this shows the full extent of the driveway. It's all in the applicant's ownership. So the proposal is to use the area which is shrubbed and behind a wall as the driveway for the existing house, and use the area in front of, or use a driveway leading down to the garage as the driveway for the new house. Next slide, please. And standing within the driveway, you can see to the left of the garage, the garden area where the house is proposed. That garden building to the left of the garage, that sits at the very rear extent of the garden. Next slide, please. Looking at just where the driveways would split, and this picture is taken from the edge of the driveway, what would be the new driveway for the existing house, looking into the existing house's garden and the new houses and the new house area, the new house site rather. Next slide, please. So that's pretty much the dividing line between the two gardens. On the left of the pathway, roughly, is would be remaining garden for the existing house. To the right of the pathway would be the new house plot. Next slide, please. And this is looking, standing beside the garage, looking down towards the corner of the garden. So this is taking the entirety of, or a large part of the house plot, and is shown. You can see the back wall of the garden there, and you can see, I think, the wall on to the left-hand side, which is the extent of the garden on that side. Next slide, please. And looking back, this is standing behind the garage, so this is where the house would stand. So this is looking towards what would be the garden plot of the new house. Next slide, please. And this is standing within the garden of the proposed house, looking back towards the garage. The garage would be part of the driveway, and the house would sit behind the garage, to the left of the garage, as you see it there. Next slide, please. And this is looking along the garden wall. Into slide, please. And looking back towards the house from the back wall of the garden area. So you can see the area which would be the existing house's new garden, and the area that would be the new house plot as well. Next slide, please. And then just standing in the corner of the proposed house plot, looking back towards the existing house. Next slide, please. And that's okay. So, planning permission is sought for the erection of a detached house in the rear garden of 90 South Street, Millerthorpe. The house would be 1.5 stories. On the ground floor, there would be a kitchen, living room, and bathroom, and upstairs would be a bedroom and a study. Part of the site is occupied by the garage for 90 South Street, and this would be demolished. Access would be via a driveway adjacent to the driveway of 90 South Street, and the house would have a garden area of 122 square metres. All the windows in the proposed house would face south into the garden area. A previous application for a house on this site was refused for reasons of overdevelopment and overshadowing of adjacent properties. To summarise the applicant's case, the previous application was refused because of overdevelopment and overshadowing. This proposal reduces the site area and reduces the footprint of the dwelling from 126 square metres to 85 square metres. Policy 17 of the Local Development Plan Residential Areas states that encouragement will generally be given to proposals which fall into one or more of the identified categories of development and which are compatible with the amenity and character of the area. Category A encourages infill residential development at a density which represents the most efficient use of the site while respecting its environs. This proposal fulfills that category. The density is less than that of neighbouring properties and the wider surrounding plots. It's also set back from the South Street facades replicating the garage and ancillary structures that exist set back from the main residential property frontages. The new dwelling would be discrete and would not impact the local environs. The proposed building is 1.6 metres from the north boundary at its closest, increases to 1.9 metres. The garage structure at 80 South Street is a very similar footprint in relationship to the plot boundary as the proposals. The development would contribute positively to the surrounding built and natural environment by providing structure and cohesion to the rear and side of 90 South Street. The new dwelling would not differ greatly to the passing visual impression of the existing garage. The daylighting assessment submitted with the application ensures that the neighbouring properties would not suffer unduly from the loss of sunlight. To summarise the handling report, there's a steady rhythm of development along the western side of South Street, principally detached and semi-detached dwelling houses, either 2 stories or 1.5 stories, all of which front directly onto the pavement. The only built development to the rear is predominantly smaller scale ancillary buildings such as garages and sheds. The proposed house is located in a backland location with no relationship to the established street scene or building line on South Street. The introduction of a dwelling house in this site fails to respect the relatively uniform streetscape and character of South Street. An approval would set an unwelcome precedent for backland development in the locality, which is at odds with the established character and density levels in the area. The principle of developing the site therefore remains contrary to policies 1A and B and 17 of the local development plan. The house is located very close to the north and west boundaries of the site. Beyond these boundaries are the private garden ground of 86 South Street, 80 South Street and 1 Bridgehold Road. While the proposed dwelling will not result in a loss of daylight to the living space of the neighbouring properties, it will result in overshadowing of the private garden ground of 86 South Street to a significant degree. 4 representations were received from members of the public, 3 objecting and 1 neutral. The grounds of objection are inappropriate density, car parking, loss of open space, loss of sunlight and daylight, noise pollution, effect on visual and residential amenity, contrary to development plan, road safety and traffic congestion, overlooking, inappropriate land use, and light pollution. The only observation, the material considerations are as identified policies 1A and B and 17 of Perth and Kinross local development plan. Other material considerations are any overshadowing and any loss of amenity, residential amenity for neighbouring properties. My only observation on the review is that the applicant's agent takes the view that the needs of the applicant constitute a material consideration. They do not. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thanks, Mr. Burton. We'll go to questions. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. When I did a site visit, I was in the community orchard, and am I right in thinking I couldn't see any other developments looking north along South Street Gardens?
No, I would concur. When I visited the site, Councillor, I did look to see if there were any other buildings that could be viewed from the rear garden, from the application site, and I couldn't see any.
Thank you.
Councillor James. And I too have no questions on this one. So members, do we have sufficient information before us and from the presentation to proceed to a decision, or do we require further supplementary information? Councillor Stewart.
I'm happy to proceed.
And Councillor James. And I too am happy to proceed on this one. Having visited the site myself and seen the entranceway, I note the comments that it's been classed as an infill site by the applicant's agent, but on the other side of the coin, it is classed as backland development, and it's normally a no to that. Looking at the dominance of the property in that land, I'm of a thought at this stage that this would not be compatible for the area to proceed, and I'm therefore of a mind to concur with the planner's reasons for refusal and to accept what's been written here. I think they are self-explanatory. So in my opinion at the moment would be to refuse the application. Councillor Stewart.
Bearing in mind this is a backlands development, I don't feel it's going to contribute to the area, and I concur with the officer's reasons for rejecting this proposal.
And Councillor James.
Hello. Yes. Got there in the end. There's not a lot else I can say that you haven't already picked up, convener. I'd on this occasion think that our planning officers have made the correct decision, and I would go along with the 3 reasons for refusal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision to concur with the officer's decision on this one.
Sorry, Convener, we are having problems with microphones. Maybe adjourn for a minute to resolve that. But in terms of this application, yes, all members unanimously have rejected the review and therefore refused permission. And you, as I understand it, you've agreed with the reasons for refusal set out on page 82 of your papers. There's no changes to those reasons. Okay.
I think we'll have a short recess if we can get these microphones working. We'll come back as soon as we can. Good afternoon again and welcome back. After a short brief recess, we now have our microphones working, I think. So on that in mind, we can now go on to the second item on the agenda, which is the change of use and alterations to agricultural building and workshop to form 3 holiday accommodation units at Eastdale, Weem, near Aberfeldy. Mr. Burton, if you could introduce for us.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures as ever. If we go to slide 1, please. You can see the application site outlined in red there. It's part of an old established farmstead building, steading building rather, and you can see it's a projection running away from the main street of Weem. The rest of the building is arranged in a kind of U shape around a courtyard directly off the main street, and to the right of the application site, you can see on the map there, it's called. There's a notation saying Weem Rock Huts. These are holiday accommodation timber huts, which are in situ. So we'll go on to the first slide, please. So that's the steading building from the main road, and you can see it's obviously age. The right hand side there is occupied. It's been converted into residential use. The left hand side of it has consent granted for residential use, but has not been implemented. Next slide, please. And that's looking along the main street. You can see the gable of the farm setting just beyond the white van. Next slide, please. And look in the other direction, past the steading buildings along Main Street. Next slide, please. So from the street, the application site is the lower building that you can see. You can see the roof line steps down towards the rear, and it's the building which has the lower roof line, which is the application property. Next slide, please. And you can see the gate leading into it. The gate is at the entrance to the property and its environs. Next slide, please. And you can see a bit more clearly the position of the application site relative to the rest of the building. You can also see that the driveway that goes past it continues beyond it into the field behind, so it remains a field access. Next slide, please. This is the application property itself. You can see the roof is still sound, the walls are sound, but clearly hasn't been occupied or used for some time. Next slide, please. And looking back, looking at the side of the property, the wooden fence there, the timber fence, marks the edge of the application property. Next slide, please. And looking at the the gable, the end gable of the application property. The wooden fence there delineates the application boundary, and beyond that is the garden area of the steading housing to the left. Next slide, please. And looking wider, you can see one of the timber huts there, which are in situ and which are existing holiday accommodation. Next slide, please. That's just to give you an idea of the surroundings. There's two holiday huts which are there with raised decks, and you can see the holiday huts are mounted on wheels. Next slide, please. Okay. So, planning permission is sought for the formation of 3 holiday accommodation units in a former barn attached to a steading in the centre of Weem. The application of property forms the eastern part of the steading that used to form part of Weem Farm. A single-storey stone with a slate roof and is accessed from an access that also serves a field and 2 timber-clad mobile homes used for tourist accommodation. The proposed units would have a kitchen, dining, living room and bathroom on the ground floor and a bedroom on a mezzanine floor within the roof. 3 dormer windows and 2 roof lights are proposed to give adequate headroom for the stairs to the mezzanine floors and to light the units. The western part of the steading building is being converted into a house which the applicant lives in, and there's an unimplemented consent for the renovation of another part of the steading building for residential use. To summarise the applicant's case, the application property is a historic building which is degrading, and the proposals would ensure its long-term survival. It's noted that the case officer has no issues with residential amenity or access. In fact, the single reason for refusal is flood risk. The application property is within the medium risk category from fluvial flooding on SEBA's flood risk map, although the property and immediate area is protected by the Weem Flood Prevention Scheme, which is constructed and maintained by the council. The proposals do not increase the footprint of the building through extension, and flood resilient materials and construction methods can be delivered through conversion works. Although a highly vulnerable use would be introduced, the principle of development is supported by an adopted, up-to-date development plan. To summarise the report of handling, Policy 52 of the Local Development Plan states that there will be a general presumption against new development which is at risk from flooding. The site lies within the area identified by SEBA's flood maps as being at medium flood risk, 200-year or 0.5% AAP flood event. This proposal looks to change the use of existing agricultural buildings to 3 holiday units, a change of use which constitutes an increased vulnerability to flood risk in terms of SEBA's flood risk guidance. The council constructed the Weem Flood Prevention Scheme in 2006, which prevents the village from the risk of flooding from the River Tay. New development behind flood defences, however, is not supported, with few exceptions. Further information on this is provided by SEPA, which says that new development cannot be supported unless it's behind a scheme providing the necessary level of protection or the redevelopment of an existing site which does not increase vulnerability to flood risk. Neither of these are the case here, and additional mitigation measures are not supported by either SEPA guidance, Scottish planning policy in terms of National Planning Framework 4, or the Local Development Plan. Proposal is therefore contrary to Policy 52 of the Local Development Plan, National Planning Framework 4 and SEPA guidance. There were no representations. Material considerations are as set out, Policy 52 of the Local Development Plan, Policy 22 of the National Planning Framework and SEPA guidance. Observations on the proposal. The sole reason for refusal is the site's flood risk. The applicant has suggested some measures which could be put in place to ameliorate flood risk, porous tarmac and improved water retention, but these have not been assessed by the Council's flood prevention team. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thanks, Mr. Burton. Councillor James, any questions?
Only a simple one. Mr. Burton, if we were bearing in mind this all centres around the flood mitigation or flood risk, if we were minded to refuse this, does the applicant have the opportunity to resubmit an application?
Yes, the planning legislation allows an applicant to resubmit or to make a fresh application within 12 months of the date of refusal for no fee.
Thank you.
And Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, convener. Mr. Burton, can I ask about, there was talk about flood pumps located nearby. Do you have knowledge of the flood pumps?
I presume they must be part of the flood prevention scheme. I don't, I'm afraid, Councillor. The flood prevention scheme went in 2006, as stated in the handling report, and as I understand it, it protects up to I think a 100-year event.
Thank you.
I have no questions myself. So, members, do we have sufficient information before us and from the presentation to proceed to a decision, or do we require further information, supplementary information? Councillor James.
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor Stewart.
I'd like to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. So I'll kick off again on this one. Reading through the report handling, it seems that there's the concept of what we're looking at here is acceptable. However, flood risk is the main cause of concern, and changing the building to holiday lets does increase the vulnerability of the properties. And in these circumstances, given that flood is the main problem, I'm of a mind, I think, to follow the planner's thoughts on this. And I thought then to refuse this, but given the opportunity that it can be resubmitted, if the applicant is of a mind to resubmit it, I think it should be done so with a full flood risk assessment, which can then be placed before our planning officers for them to make a decision and, if necessary, approach SEPA. So my thoughts here are to refuse with the opportunity to resubmit if the applicant wishes with the proper FRA. Councillor James.
I think we're going to agree on most things today, convener. There's nothing further I can add. I like the fact, and for the sake of a quick solution for the applicant, it's good to see that they can reapply within 12 months. And I think, you know, we could have asked for a report which would have taken time, but I just think for the importance of brevity and for them to conclude this, then I'd be only to refuse on the grounds the officers have already given. Thanks.
And Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, convener. Yes, I agree with the concept of what you're probably thinking on the lines of the look of Weem Village, the historic buildings. We're looking at employment. However, we can't escape the concerns that the officers have raised with regards to the vulnerabilities around flooding, which is, I would agree to refuse this application at this time.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. So, Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision again on this one. I think there needs to be a slight rewording of the reasons for refusal, given the current updates, but apart from that, it's unanimous.
Yes, convener. Members have unanimously agreed, generally in line with the officer's reason for refusal, which is page 171 of your papers. But convener, you are correct. There needs to be an update, technical updating, because the the development plan is no longer the same as was narrated in the reason for refusal. Not normally my remit, but my suggestion would be for this technical change that it reads about half to 2/3 of the way down. The second part of this reason for refusal is changed to read: the proposal is therefore contrary to the principles and aims of Policy 52 of Perth and Cross Local Development Plan 2, 2019. SEPA Planning Information Note 4, Pin 4. Now, and Policy 22, Flood Risk and Water Management of National Planning Framework 4, which all look to protect new land uses from an unacceptable flood risk. And you'll see members what I've suggested there is I've taken out reference to Scottish Planning Policy 2014. That's no longer part of a relevant policy. And also policy 24 of the emerging NPF4 is now policy 22 of NPF4. So if members are content with that, that will be technically updated to the current development plan.
I think we're all in agreement that nicely put, Mr. Elliott. Better than I could do it, but I think we're all in agreement to that. Yeah. Thank you. Right, so members will now move on to item 4.3. This is to do with a residential development in principle, land 50 metres south of Strawberry Bank in Longforgan. Mr. Burton, if you would.
Thank you, Chair. You see on the screen before you the application site in red, a large corner site. You can see Strawberry Bank, the applicant's house, just to the north of that, and you can see that the road bends round quite significantly from the south to the north, past the application site. You can just see the application site access at the very top right of the field there. That's the existing field access. Next slide, please. So looking at the existing access to the site and looking down the road towards the houses of the applicant's house, you can see the roof of just over the hedge, and there are further houses fronting onto the road further along that the road you see there. Next slide, please. And looking back down the other direction, you can see how much the road bends just at this point. The gate that you can see is the field access to the field, and that would be the site of the proposed access for the development. Next slide, please. So looking down the edge of the field, to the right is the hedge separating the applicant's house, Strawberry Bank, from the field. The road proposed would run pretty much along the line you see before you, and the two houses would be built on the left-hand side of that. Next slide, please. That's looking back towards the access, towards the road through the access. Next slide, please. So from just within the access, you can see the field is quite extensive, and it's quite flat. You can also see that it's bounded by a fairly heavy line of shrub trees. Next slide, please. That's looking towards the site of the proposed houses, just beyond the tuft of grass there. The access road would be on the right-hand side. The houses would be straight in front of you as you view the field there, and the gardens would be to the left. Next slide, please. And that's looking from the far side of the field, where the road would come in back towards the access road. The access to the main road. Next slide, please. And looking back towards Strawberry Bank, the applicant's house, it's just beyond the hedge there. Next slide, please. And standing at where the access road would be, looking at the full extent of the site, you can see it's a large area. Next slide, please. Okay. So planning permission in principle is sought for the erection of two houses on an open field to the south of a line of houses to the north of the A90. Well, the application is for permission in principle. An indicative layout shows two houses on the northern part of the field served by a shared driveway using the existing field access with extensive gardens leading south. To summarise the applicant's case, the application site is adjacent to a line of houses to the north, so the proposal in extending that building group would comply with Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside of the Local Development Plan. The report of handling confirms that the application site is immediately to the south of an established building group, and that the site is well defined by existing landscape features and topography. This meets the requirements of the supplementary guidance supporting Policy 19. The house plots shown on the indicative plan are similar to the plot sizes of the houses in the existing group. The application site has no current use, and given its size and location, has no prospect of being used for agriculture. Discussions with the Council's Road Service have confirmed that the proposed access to the site could be made acceptable, and the relevant calculations are included in the appeal papers. The papers before you, councillors, from page 265 onwards. To summarise the handling report, policy 19 of the local development plan is relevant. The most relevant category is building groups. The application site is not considered to accord with the requirements for this category, as the site is significantly larger than the plots within the adjacent grouping to the north, and due to the position of the embankment and the sloping topography along the east and south boundaries, it would not be possible to front any development onto the road, which is characteristic of that building group. The policy requires new development to respect the established character and building pattern of the adjacent grouping. This proposal is not considered to achieve this. The indicative layout which has been submitted only serves to demonstrate that development on this site would fail to respect the established character of the grouping, which generally sees dwellings fronting eastwards onto the public road. The proposed vehicle access to the road network for the properties will be via an existing farm track, which should be upgraded as part of the development. The access is at the end of a blind curve from the A90 junction, making visibility poor. The submission has advised that works will be carried out to improve the visibility display, but it would appear that these works are out with the red line planning application boundary. Given the principle of development is considered to be contrary to policy, further information on visibility displays has not been requested, and the proposal is considered to be contrary to policy 60B, as it has not been demonstrated that safe access and egress to the site can be provided. If permission were granted for the development, a developer contribution for Longforgan Primary School would be required. There were no public representations and material considerations. Policy 19 of the local development plan, as stated in the previously, is relevant, as is policy 60B, transport standards and accessibility. Policy 17 of National Planning Framework 4, new homes and for new housing development in rural areas, which fall into one of 8 categories. One is on a site allocated for housing in the local development plan. 2, it would reuse brownfield land. Would a return to a natural state has not or will not happen without intervention. 3, it would reuse a redundant or unused building. 4, it's an appropriate use of historic environment asset. 5, it's demonstrated to be necessary to support the sustainable management of a viable rural business or croft, and there's an essential need for a worker. 6 is for a single home for the retirement succession of viable farm holding. 7, it's for the subdivision of an existing residential dwelling, scale of which is in keeping with the character and infrastructure provision in the area. Or 8, it reinstates a former dwelling house, or as a one-off, as a one-for-one replacement of an existing permanent house. Some observations on the proposal. National Planning Framework 4 did not form part of the development plan when the application was determined. It now does, so is now a material consideration, as outlined. It must be considered by the committee alongside local development plan policy in coming to a decision on the proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. How far does this development group of housing extend to, please?
It extends about 8 or 9 houses to the north of Strawberry Bank. At the top of that, there's a shared driveway access to 3 houses off to the west.
Thank you.
And Councillor James.
No further questions from me, thank you.
And I've got no questions on this one either. So members, do we have sufficient information before us and from the presentation to proceed to a decision, or do we require further supplementary information? More. Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
I'd like to proceed.
And Councillor James.
Also happy to proceed.
Thank you very much. So Councillor Stewart, would you like to kick off on this one?
Thank you, Convener. Having visited the site, I do have concerns with the egress and access to the site which has been talked about. But I would like to refuse this application, particularly on point 1 of the authors, the policy 19 housing in the countryside, bearing in mind the group of housing leading north and west along this area.
Thank you, Councillor. I too have been to see the site and actually parked in the proposed driveway. It is a difficult turning to come out, undoubtedly. In fairness, traffic that did pass me was driving less than the 40-mile limit, but it is a difficult turning to come out of because of the blind bend on your right-hand side. And I noticed we've got information to do with the visibility displays. As far as the houses are concerned, I had a walk up the road. I know that comments have been made about the houses being sideways on, or proposed to be sideways on. There is already a house up there which is on the sideways, perpendicular side to the road, which has a shared access with somebody else. So it wouldn't be unique, but I think at this stage it's unfair to comment further. I'm not going to refuse the application, as my colleague has, but what I do feel is that we should defer for information from transport planning to assess the traffic information that we have in front of us, for them to then pass that information back to development management, and then obviously give us an indication from there. So my decision would be to defer the application for further information before we make a final judgment on this case. Councillor James.
Thanks, convener. Yeah, again, I'm agreeing with you. Housing in the countryside, which I was looking at here, it says the scale, layout and design of the proposal must be appropriate to and have a good fit with the landscape character and the area which is located. I think it fits all of that. I think the argument that, okay, it doesn't front onto the road comes about by the necessity for a safe egress from these buildings. And it would make sense to have them orientated that way and the access moved to where they're proposing. I do agree with you that the visibility displays need to be assessed before we give it the go-ahead. So like yourself, convener, I'd be quite happy to defer this so that information can be looked at. This is, of course, an in-principle application for 2 houses. I know on the front it just says for residential development, but you know, I wouldn't be happy to see more than 2, despite the size of that site. I think it's quite a good fit. So I'd go for deferment for the to have the visibility looked at. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So, Mr. Elliott, we now have a majority decision on this one for deferment for more information.
Yes, thank you, Convener. We've kind of got a wee bit out of sequence of procedure, because when asked whether ready to proceed, we probably should have heard you at that stage rather than getting into debate and opinions. But we are where we are, and certainly clear majority of members is to defer. And I think the deferral would be for transport planning to comment on the access visibility display information provided with the review application. And then it would obviously, in terms of the rules, the applicant would be able to comment on their response. Then it would come back to you. So at the moment, we only need to say defer for transport planning to comment on the access visibility display information provided with the review application. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll now move on to the 4th item this morning, which is erection of a dwelling house, change of use and alterations to a former reservoir building to form linked ancillary building and associated works, former water reservoir and Blackberry Road, Dunkeld. And I believe we have the applicants with us this morning, so welcome to you. So, Mr. Burton, if I can ask you to introduce it first of all.
Thank you, Chair. You can see the application site outlined in red on the plan on your screens. You see it's situated at a bend in the road above Dunkeld. You can see the settlement of Dunkeld to the left-hand side of the aerial picture there. Next slide, please. So looking at the application site entrance, back down towards Dunkeld, you can see the bend on the road. You can also see what is clearly a relatively recent bell mouth being formed there. That is part of the previous consent, the existing consent for the conversion of the building on site to residential use. Because that bell mouth you can see in the picture there has been formed, that consent remains extant and is not time limited. Next slide, please. And you can see the access slightly more clearly, and as the road looks the other direction away from Dunkeld, and you can see how steeply sloping the site is from that picture. Next slide, please. Looking straight into the application site, you can see it's significantly wooded, and it also slopes down from the road. Next slide, please. And looking down into the site from the edge of the bell mouth, you can see it is quite a steep slope, and it's got a variety of types of trees on it. Next slide, please. And looking down into the site, you can see the stone building, which has consent for conversion to residential use. The application site is between that house, or that building rather, and where the photograph is taken from. Next slide, please. And that is more or less the application site. That is pretty much where the building would be situated. Next slide, please. And that's you can see a bit of the outline of the roof of the existing building through the trees there. That's another view of the site of the proposed house. Next slide, please. So, planning permission is sought for the erection of a detached house adjacent to an existing building, which is proposed to be converted to a pottery studio and office. The new house will be single-storey, of linear design, partly elevated above the ground. It would have 2 or 3 bedrooms. The plans show a bedroom which is capable of being split into 2, a study, a kitchen, dining room, and a living room. It would have a flat sedum roof and would be finished in timber boarding. The application site is a former reservoir just north of Dunkeld. It has an existing consent granted in 2008 and reviewed in 2013, amended in 2016, for the conversion and extension of the existing reservoir building to form a 3-bedroomed house. Work was started to implement that consent in the form of an access, so it remains live. A new house, similar to that proposed here, was the subject of a planning application in 2020, which was refused and then considered by the local review body, which upheld that refusal in February 2022. The house proposed under this application would be closer to the road than that house, and would entail the loss of fewer trees from the site. To summarise the applicant's case, the proposal is similar to the one refused in 2022, but would require the loss of fewer trees and lifts the new house above the flood risk area. It's been cited to avoid tree loss as much as possible and would require the loss of 7 trees, 3 of which are dead or dying. The extant permission would require the loss of 30 trees. The site is not ancient woodland, as is stated by the case officer. The proposed application provides an opportunity to provide biodiversity on the site by restoring degraded habitats currently at risk from invasive non-native species and strengthening nature networks and connections through a woodland management plan, which includes the planting of 100 new native trees. The extant planning permission involves the conversion of the existing reservoir building, which is in a flood risk area. The proposed new house would not be at risk from flooding, so the proposal meets Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside, specifically Category 3.2 of the Supplementary Guidance, which gives support for the relocation of a house which is in a flood risk area. To summarise the handling report, this is a complex application involving complicated planning issues. The change of design of the proposal from the previous one to what is now essentially a modification of a live permission is also a significant consideration. A balanced assessment has to be made, giving a sufficient level of weighting to the now live planning permission for the conversion of the existing building against the impact on trees and biodiversity, against the quality of design which has been brought forward, which in isolation and in another location would be something which Perth and Kinross Council would encourage. Changes have been made from the previous refusal, and the current proposal would result in fewer trees being felled been directly removed and affected, although this development would still affect a number of existing trees, and the siting of a large dwelling within an area of woodland would have a more significant impact on biodiversity than the existing proposal and could create pressure for further removals. There also remains no clear pathway to securing a long-term regeneration of the woodland or assurances that more than the 10 trees listed within the tree survey will be removed permanently for improvements to residential amenity purposes. The proposed movement of the consented dwelling to deal with flood risk is a legitimate concern. The housing in the countryside guidance supports the replacement of existing occupied dwellings which are subject to flood risk, but does not cover proposals which are not yet built, finished or occupied. In light of this, there is no specific policy support for the relocation. The principle of moving the extant planning permission to a location with the flood risk is not an issue, could possibly be considered appropriate and in line with the spirit of the policy, subject to issues such as a suitable site, the revocation of the extant permission, and long-term woodland management arrangements. Policy 19 and the supplementary guidance is clear, however, that the clearing of an area of woodland to create a site of new homes is not acceptable and should be avoided. As such, it's difficult to argue that such an approach should be taken in this case. Even using the argument and justification that the proposal is now a modification of the existing life permission, there remains a policy conflict. The application site is classified as ancient woodland and is therefore considered to have a high natural, historic and cultural heritage value. It's the view of officers that the proposal would have more of a negative impact on the woodland than the proposed access element of the life planning permission. The removal of the trees and creation of the dwelling within the woodland area would have an initial adverse impact on the established habitats of the area and over the long term. 22 letters of representation were received. 4 are general neutral comments, 2 object, and 16 support the proposal. The objectors' concerns are the footpath which runs through the south part of the site, conflict with the development plan, and tree loss. Supporting comments relate to design, benefit to the environment, and more local homes. So the material considerations for this application, National Planning Framework Policies 14, Design in Place, and 16, Quality Homes, both support high quality new homes. Policy 17 of the NPF4, Rural Homes, is also relevant. Relevant local development plan policies are Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside, Policy 30, Historic Battlefields and Assets, 40A and B, Trees, 41, Biodiversity, and 52, Flooding. Some observations. The NatureScot website confirms that the woodland area containing the application site is covered by NatureScot's Ancient Woodland Inventory. It is classified, however, within that as 2B, Long Established Woodland, which is not as high a classification as Ancient Woodland. As the handling report states, this is not a straightforward decision. The committee must make a judgment on whether the new proposal will have benefits over the existing extant permission, which are significant enough to justify granting planning permission. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. You're right, it's a complicated case. We'll go to questions. I think, if I may, I'll ask first, as I haven't asked any this morning. This afternoon, I should say, just can't get it right in a minute. The ancient woodland situation. There's obviously we're coming to ancient woodland in many of our papers. Many of the supplementary papers say it isn't ancient woodland, and calls the dates anything after 1750 is not ancient woodland. So could we just clarify that situation first of all?
Yes, I consulted NatureScot's website on this, and while it's not the clearest I've ever seen, it does show that the woodland, you can see on the screen before you just how much woodland there is around. Now, woodland, the ancient woodland designation spreads to the north of Blairgowrie Road and to the east of Blairgowrie Road. It also includes the application site, but the application site has a designation within that inventory of being Class 2B, and Class 2B is not the highest classification of ancient woodland, but is one, as I said, which is classified as long established woodland, which is a lesser category.
Okay. Second question. In the new proposal, we're talking only of 10 trees being removed as opposed to 30. But planning officers mentioned that there'd be more trees because of the visibility displays. Now, my thoughts were that if we were to go ahead with the existing planning, those trees would still have to be removed. Visibility. So either way, those trees would have to be taken out because it is a difficult turn. Obviously, you're right on a sharp bend. Am I right on that basis?
I would agree, Councillor. The visibility displays would be exactly the same, whichever, if the existing consent were implemented or if the new, or if planning permission were granted for this new application.
Sorry, members, I'm making up for lost time. There is also strong points raised about the woodland management plan. A lot of people obviously compliment it, and it's an important part of this. Can we condition that be put in place?
I would take the view it would be quite acceptable for committee if they're reminded to grant permission to attach a condition which required the woodland management plan to be implemented. Perhaps because these things change with time and the woodland management plan covers a long time period, it might be prudent to include the ability for agreement to be reached with the council officers, the biodiversity officer, for instance, to amend that plan as necessary as time goes on.
My last one for the moment would be there's another comment in the report handling is that if the building was built in time, there might be a need to remove the canopy of trees, give more light and more visual aspect to the property. Is it feasible to put any form of tree preservation orders on trees as a condition, or would that be very difficult to monitor?
I don't think you could put that on as a condition, Councillor. The tree preservation orders are put in place by the council. The appropriate part of the council could go ahead with that, regardless of this application. I don't think you could include a condition saying that no trees other than those identified in the application in the application information are to be felled. So that would be a condition which could be applied.
Yes, Mr. Wright.
Thank you, Convener. Just to supplement that, the issue with the TPO process is a separate process. So it wouldn't be something that normally you would condition through the planning process. But as Mr. Burton's alluding to, there would be other conditions, planning conditions you could put on. One that strikes me is quite a common one where if they're concerned about other trees, not the ones to be felled, but other trees, then it's a fairly standard condition to put on there's a British standard to protect those during the construction process. You could also be removing permitted development rights here, which I know has been mentioned. So the planning process deals with it differently. TPOs are a separate process from planning, could still come about, but that's separate. You wouldn't condition it under the planning.
Councillor James, any questions?
I've no further questions. Thank you, Convener.
And Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. Mr. Burton, you alluded to the path leading in the south part of this site. Was it my reading in the part of the woodland management plan was deer fencing? Is that, did I read the plans right, that there's gates to the sort of the southeast and the west of the path?
I think you are right, Councillor. You can see the path faintly on the aerial photograph before you there, leading through the site close to the western boundary. It would be, if committee were reminded to grant this, you could attach a condition requiring that the fences, the gates rather, that you alluded to would be kept unlocked.
Thank you. Now, just for my clarification, because there's lots of figures from the present application and the previous live order. Am I right in thinking that we're going to have a net gain of native species of trees of 91?
The woodland management plan would suggest that, Councillor, yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you very much. I think I have no further questions either. So, members, do we have sufficient information before us and from the presentation to proceed to a decision, or do we require further supplementary information? Councillor James.
Very happy to proceed, Convener.
And Councillor Stewart.
I'm ready to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. Councillor James, if you want to lead on this one.
Thanks very much. If I'm honest, Convener, I'm disappointed that this has come back to LRB. It's been subject to planning before, local review body before, and new set of plans put in, and here we are at LRB. With the applicant having jumped through several hoops, and I think in this instance has actually taken on board everything that was brought up at previous planning applications and the previous LRB. For instance, moving the property closer to the road for less tree damage. What we've got here, we're actually deciding on which house we like, because there will be a house here that there's extant permission for the old house down at the bottom, which you saw in the photograph. So there will be, but what's best for what seems to be the issue here seems to be the ancient woodland, which actually turns out it's not ancient woodland, it's a long established woodland. And a lot of weight's been put on that. But I think what we need to decide is which design's better. And I think this new design is far better. It exceeds what they already have permission for by miles. A third less trees being lost. It develops far less of the site which they're worried about. Management of invasive species, that we're getting rid of invasive species, and it deals with the flood risk issue, which is prevalent with the extant permission further down the hill. We're getting a woodland management plan, something that's not in place at the minute. So we're actually improving the area. So I don't have any issue at all. I think in this case, I think our planners did get it wrong, and I'm quite happy to allow this development to go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have visited the site myself and had a good look round. It is an unusual design house, I must admit, going in, but it certainly seems to have a lot of support. And I think the important thing you've mentioned is that it's not just a question of building a house here. There's a desire to actually work the site and improve it with a proper woodland management plan. So not only will the house be built in there of a high design and new innovation, but the actual area is going to be worked, removing invasive species, developing biodiversity, and allowing a path to go through, which will overall improve the whole area. And certainly the letters of support that have come through have all mentioned that, as you have. So at this stage, I think I'm going to agree with you and support this development. There are conditions I think that should be put in place. It is going against policy to some extent, but I feel that we can do so because there is already an outstanding plan permission in place. And obviously, as I've mentioned, the design of the property is an innovative design. It's a hard one to say. So I feel in this occasion we can go against the general policy and approve this. As I say, there are conditions I think should be put in place. along the lines of a root protection program to allow the existing trees to be protected during construction, removal of permitted development rights to protect the site should there be any further plans to improve it. There is an extent permission, and I think that needs to, and I think that the applicants have volunteered to revoke that. I'm not sure how that's done legally, but we can have that revoked either by revocation or legal agreement. And also there has been a lot of mention about the woodland management plan, which is an important part of this. And I think we could put a condition for that to be put in place. I'm not sure the exact wording that would be. Mr. Burton mentioned it. And also there's a path going through, which I think again has been agreed to manage that, and there should be a condition that's maintained for people to use, which was another factor which many people wanted to mention when they supported this. So to sum up, I'm happy to approve it subject to all those conditions, and I think there'll be other conditions put in regarding biodiversity and trees, but that's one for others to think out, I think. But like you, I'm in agreement this should be allowed to go ahead. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. I think it's quite right that we should be looking at biodiversity in this climate change emergency, and we have a reduction in biodiversity. That said, I think this application before us today is an improvement, and I'm not going to repeat my colleagues' comments, but I feel that this is supporting placemaking, with the old building being used as an office, so reducing travel and living locally. The building is at a high standard and going to reduce carbon emissions. I feel sufficiently satisfied that this is going to be a managed area for native biodiversity, so I am minded to support this application. Thank you.
So, Ms. Rowlett, we have a unanimous decision on this one to go ahead with conditions, but I'm going to leave you to resolve those.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, unanimously granted. And I do need to clarify one point, but I think the process would be grant subject to suitable conditions and informatives. And yes, Convener, you're right. It's on the predication that the existing consent is taken away. In terms of revocation, it's not entirely clear whether that can be done for an existing consent. So what we can say is revoke or possible legal agreement. So one way or the other will resolve that. You've mentioned various conditions. I won't go over those, but yes, those I've noted those down, and officers will take that forward. But it's the justification I wanted to mention. Convener, you in particular mentioned that the way I would phrase it is that it's, strictly speaking, it's contrary to development plan because you have the removal of trees. However, Convener, what you said, it's outweighed by the existing consent and the removal of trees under that, and by the innovative design of this proposal. When I see the other members are nodding their heads, so we would narrate it in that way. So technically contrary to policy, but you've given material considerations as to why it would be granted.
Agreed with that, yes, I think we're all agreed, yeah.
I would also agree. I put outweighed by existing design loss, you know, the loss of what we would have had. So, yeah.
Thank you, members, and wish you luck, the applicants. So we'll move on now to the last paper this morning, which is this afternoon. Why do I keep saying this morning? I don't know. My brain is stuck, I think, in the wrong time at the moment. We're now on to number 5, which is the alterations and extension to dwelling house and installation of flue at 45 Tay Avenue, Comrie. Mr. Burton, if you'd introduce, please.
Thank you, Chair. You see in the aerial picture on your screen, the application site is front centre of it. You can see surrounded by similar dwellings. It's in an area of characterised by bungalows, and many of them remain the same as the application property at the moment. Next slide, please. So that's the application property. You can see there's already there's a bay window to the front. There's a driveway to the side, and gardens to the side, and you can see the rear fence the fence of the rear garden towards the rear of the house at the side there. Next slide, please. Looking at the house from straight on, you can see the garage quite clearly. The proposed extension would be on the area to the left of the front door and the front door itself. So the bay window frontage, part of the frontage with the part of the frontage with the bay window rather would remain, and the extension to the front would extend beyond that level for about 3 meters or so beyond the front of the house as it currently stands. Next slide, please. A side view showing the side gable of the house and giving a clearer idea perhaps of the part which would be extended to the front, which is the window to the left of the front door. Next slide, please. And looking at it more from the side. Next slide, please. So looking at it from the side there, you can see the front of the house there. The new front extension would project about 3 meters beyond that line that you see in front of you. Where the kitchen window, where the window is rather, to the side of the house, the gable that you can see, that's where the extension would project towards the road. Next slide, please. And that's showing within the context of the rear garden, which, as you can see, extends out towards the road, but also the garden fence on the right-hand side of the picture there shows the extent of the garden to the rear of the house. Next slide, please. Right. So planning permission is sought for extensions to the front and back, the front and side of a detached bungalow on the residential area of Comrie and for the installation of a black metal flue. The bungalow currently has 3 bedrooms, lounge, dining room, kitchen and bathroom. The proposed extensions would add a large kitchen to the side of the property and a bedroom and vestibule to the front. The new bedroom would add space for storage and an ensuite bathroom, as well as creating larger bedrooms. So there wouldn't be an additional bedroom created. The 3 bedrooms would just be larger. One of them would have an ensuite bathroom, and there would be additional storage created. The current kitchen would become a utility room, and the new additions are proposed to be partly clad in timber. The side elevation would project approximately 4 meters from the existing side wall of the house, and the front extension by approximately 3 meters. To summarise the applicant's case, the applicants seek additional space because of the needs of their growing family and to facilitate Mr. Comrie working from home as a sole trader. The extended bedrooms would be more in keeping with current needs. The applicants have searched for alternative properties within Comrie for some time without success. Extending into the small back garden would be detrimental to the enjoyment of the house, and extending over the driveway would cut off access to the garage, so it's not something that could be considered. The proposals are in keeping with other extensions in the area and pick up the original themes of the street layout and house designs. The extensions have been designed to enhance the courtyard space of the cul-de-sac and to provide 2 attractive principal elevations to the front and side of the property while retaining an improved front garden area. It's considered that the layout of T Avenue and the surrounding streets have loose building lines, so it's not appropriate to apply rules more suited to formal urban streetscapes. To summarise the handling report, the proposed extensions would have a significant detrimental impact on the character and appearance of the property's simple form and character. The proposed flue would also create a negative visual impact due to its height and location to the property's principal elevation. The design is contrary to the Perth and Ross Placemaking Guide 2020, which states that front extensions should generally be avoided, in particular where they would dominate the principal elevation of the property, and that side extensions should be set back from building lines. The proposal would not be in keeping with the residential character of the area, which features open spaces and soft landscaping at the front and side, so would be contrary to policies 17A and C of the Local Development Plan, which seek to ensure that development contributes positively to the quality of the surrounding built environment by complementing and respecting its surroundings, and which improves the character and environment of the area. There are no representations received. Material considerations are policies 17A and C of the Local Development Plan, and the Perth and Kinross Placemaking Guide 2020 is also relevant. Some observations on the proposal. The extensions breach the front and side elevations of the property, which, because of the corner location, both constitute principal elevations. The judgment which the committee must make is whether these breaches adversely impact on the appearance of the property itself and the street scene. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. Mr. Burton, we are looking at a slide in front of us right now, and during my visit to the area and walking around, there's multiple houses with multiple shapes, as in L shapes and extensions and different levels of roofs. So am I right in thinking when I walked around, the picture that's in front of us is quite indicative of the area?
I would agree with your assessment, Councillor. When I visited, I did think that the application property was quite typical of the houses in the general area.
Thank you. When I was walking, when you had your site visit, were you aware of other extensions locally?
Some houses clearly have been extended. It looks to me as if the two houses to the east of the application property have been extended to some extent. I did notice some extensions. They tended not to be major, and I didn't notice any extensions quite the same as the two extensions proposed here.
Thank you, Mr. Burton.
Councillor James.
No, Convener, no questions for me, thank you.
I just have one, Mr. Burton. Looking at the proposed side extension, that'd be on the west of this picture. They've obviously gone only part way up the side, and I just wonder, there's nothing to restrict that a full extension for the full length of the house, is there, as far as I could see?
In practical and building terms, no. It would be breaching one of the principal elevations of the house, so it wouldn't comply with policy in that respect. But in terms of practicality and in terms of the possibilities of the building, no, you're quite correct.
Thank you very much. So members, I have no more questions. So members, do we have sufficient information before us and from the presentation to proceed to a decision, or do we require further supplementary information? Councillor Stewart.
I can proceed.
And Councillor James.
Yeah, likewise.
And I too am happy to proceed. So Councillor Stewart, would you like to lead off, please?
Thank you, Convener. We are part of the Planning and Placemaking Committee, and placemaking is very important. And I can understand why people would like to stay in their house because of the area. However, I have got no concerns about extending properties, because you can see that the properties have been extended. But I do have concerns about looking at the north elevation being the extending out to the front of the house. So I'd be, on that reason, minded to refuse this application at this time.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Looks like I'm going to agree with Councillor Stewart. I'm exactly the same. You know, I'm not against the idea of extending the house, just the way in which it's extended. And I think our officers got the assessment right on their refusal. So I'd like to stick with what our officers have recommended. Thank you.
Thank you both. My decision, of course, now is academic, but I'm in agreement with both of you, I think, on this one. I never object normally to extensions. I think it helps develop a house, and there's certainly no standard design in this area. And obviously, as Councillor Stewart said, some have already been extended anyway. But I have a concern about the way this is being planned, both the extension to the front and at the side, and it just doesn't seem to fit, particularly in a house which is in a prominent prominent location such as this. So I'm inclined, as my colleagues are, to agree with the reasons for refusal by our planners. I would say to the applicants, of course, like everyone else, they can resubmit another application within 12 months without any extra charge. And I think there are various options that they could adopt, maybe to get a better way of extending the house. But I'll leave that one with them. So we are unanimous, Mr. Elliott, on this one as well, to concur with the planner's decision.
Yes, thank you, Convener. Take to page 655, 656 for the original reasons for refusal. My understanding, members, is you refused unanimously in line with the reasons for refusal that I've outlined with no changes.
Yep, agreed. And that, members, brings us to the end of this afternoon's local review body. So I thank you again for your participation. Thank you, Mr. Burton, Mr. Elliott, and Mr. Williams. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you.